Welcome, welcome. All right. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this month's installment of the Federation for Children with Special Needs Connecting Families, an opportunity for us to connect with all of you and for you to connect with all of us and talk about issues that are really relevant to all of us as families and who have children with special needs. My name is Elizabeth Bostic. For those of you who don't know me, a longtime friend of the Federation and one of the things I'm just really excited about is tonight's topic, because many of you are more familiar with stories that I've told about my African American side or my African American perspective. And a few of you know that also that part of my heritage is also Native American. I'm a proud member of the Wampanoag tribe, the Seaconke Wampanoag tribe, and have just come back from an amazing experience at the Gathering of Nations, which was in Albuquerque, New Mexico last week, which is the largest powwow reportedly in the United States. So it was wonderful to be there with family and to see representation from over 420 different tribes across the country. So as you can imagine, this topic is really exciting for me because we are going to be talking about and really exploring the film that we've all had the opportunity to see last week, Imagining the Indian, the fight against Native American mascotting. And if you haven't had an opportunity to see that amazing documentary, you still can do that by accessing it on Prime Video. So do know that you still have access to it. And I have it downloaded and it says I can watch it for the next 30 days. And I'm probably going to watch it a few more times because you just learn so much each time. So, having done that, we have an amazing panel of people here today to help us understand this topic and really talk about what we can learn about why these mascots are harmful to the Native American population, the impact on Native youth, and the work that's being done to combat these mascots and how you can support that. Because we all, when we're talking about justice, we're all responsible for it, right? So we're going to talk about that. And before we get started, I do want to pause and make sure that people know that if, in fact, English is not your first language and you would like interpretation services, there is a link to the Wordly app in the chat, and you will be able to access the language that works best for you. So we're going to take a little bit of time, or a good chunk of time here, just having a discussion about these topics, and then we have some time at the end for some Q&A. All right. So before we get started, though, we of course want to introduce you to this amazing panel. And so I'm going to ask each person to actually do that, and I'm going to do it kind of in the order in which I see them on my screen. So Jeannine, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Jeannine Hunt, and I am from the Herring Pond Wampanoag tribe here in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And I'm excited to be part of this panel this evening.
Thank you so much for being with us, Jeannine.
Yeah.
And Melissa, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, good evening. Wanikisak, Natasuis, Melissa Ferretti, Nutomas, Sikwana Makupakwet. Good evening. My name is Melissa Ferretti, or I am called Melissa Ferretti, and I am the chairwoman of the Herring Pond Wampanoag tribe. And I'm also extremely honored to be here with Darius and my cousin Jeannine. She does a lot more than just be part of the tribe. Jeannine is a really important part of the work that we do. So I want to make sure I say that. So thank you so much. I'm excited to talk with you all.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And thank you also for exposing us to a language that we're all fighting to keep alive. So I really appreciate that. And Faries, last but not least, could you please introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Faries Gray. I am the Sagamore of the Massachusetts tribe at Ponkapoag, also one of our tribal historians, and the Massachusetts representative for the Mascot Steering Committee. Thank you. Honored to be here.
Thank you so much, Farius. And for those in our audience who may not understand what the term Sagamore means, could you give some context for what that means within our culture?
Sure. Sagamore is basically a war chief. Traditionally, we had three traditional leaders. We had a Sachem, who would be the main leader or the main representative of the people. And then you would have a powwow or a powwusk, which a powwow is the medicine man and a powwusk would be the medicine woman. And then you would have the Sagamore, which I am the war chief. My responsibilities, or the war chief's responsibilities, would be protection of the tribe and the territory.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that with all of us. All right. Well, let's get started. This is we have some questions, and of course, that you're aware of, and I can't wait to hear everyone's perspective on this. But could you explain kind of what we know about the history of racist mascots and stereotypes of Native people? Who would like to get started with that?
I can go.
Okay.
So what we know is what I know. I mean, it started between the 1930s and 50s is when these names were created on the mascot. And in that time, the Native Americans weren't, we were being disrespected, right? We weren't popular, we weren't known or being spoke as in a positive way. So all of these names that were created were derogatory and negative to us. I just feel like in the time that they were done, it was wrong. So that's the base of it for me. It was done disrespectfully in that time.
Would either of you, Melissa or Farius, like to add anything to that?
Farius, you go ahead and then I can follow up.
Thank you, Melissa. I would say that, this whole racism with imagery, basically, because that's what a mascot is, it's imagery and represents something. It began long before any sports teams were ever thought of here. It began when the Europeans or the colonists first arrived here. And on that sail, they had a representation of us here with the words, come here and save us, or come over here and save us. Given the interpretation that the indigenous people were weak and they needed help or needed to be saved. So the racism was here since the beginning. This isn't something that grew. This is something that has continued since the very beginning of the colonists coming into our territories. So this is, for a lot of people, it might be something they think is new, but this is something that's old, very old, over 400 years old. And now I'm sure we're all just thankful that we're able to address this issue.
So in reality, the mascotting is just the more recent manifestation of the racism that's been existing all along. Yes.
Agreed.
Melissa, you had come unmuted for a moment there, so.
Yeah. I mean, I think what Jeannine and Farius it's accurate. The 20th century was a really pivotal time when these mascots got real popular. But again, as Farius said, we feel the racism has obviously started way before when the colonists arrived, and these human imagery is really a testament of that. Native people have been saying for long time that these mascots need to go, and it's really a choice of Native people to make that. So it is something that started very early on, and as time went on, it just progressed. So yeah, very much so.
Yeah, it is striking how very often people may focus on one particular aspect of racism, but it really is just that. It's one aspect of a long history, literally quite since the beginning of the inception of this country as the United States, and the disregard for people who were here to begin with, right, and who already had established themselves as residents here, and all that happened as a result. All right, so talk a little bit about the impact of these mascots on Native American communities in Massachusetts, and in particular on the youth. What's the impact on our communities?
I'll for me myself, as a youth, I am not only a Native American, but I'm also Cape Verdean. So in the community, being a Cape Verdean was, when I was in elementary school and middle school, it was It was grand. It was a great thing. We had festivals, the music, and being a native, it was something that in school and when we were learning about, it was something I was scared to raise my hand and say, I'm a Native American. And that's not what I learned being with family and around family. When we celebrated with my cousin here, Melissa, and the elders, and she was lucky enough to be rooted and live with an elder, and she got a lot which she has is and still passes on to myself and other tribal members, but I didn't get that firsthand knowledge like Melissa had. So being Cape Verdean was what people are like, wait, you're Native American too? But being in school and the way that they pointed in directive that who we were and what we stood for was so false, the image, that it was something that I didn't raise my hand as a youth. It wasn't something that I could learn more about and be proud of. It hurt to learn the knowledge that they were giving in these classrooms, to be honest with you. It was upsetting to hear and know this when you're at a family gathering and you're, you know, hearing about your elders and you're on our land and we're on Herring Pond, and then to go to school and this is what you hear about your people, the other side. So it was confusing too.
Yeah, I can so identify with that because being raised in an African American home and Native American home,
Mhm.
we didn't actually start talking actively about our Native American heritage until very recently, and so I was always aware of it, but not actively involved. And it's only been recently where it feels as though people are feeling more freedom to be able to talk about it openly.
Gaining a voice.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Melissa.
Yeah, I could, piggyback off of what Jeannine said. I think that, when we talk about the impact on our youth and the young people and just people, Native people in general, right? It brings me back, like Jeannine, to being a child and myself, educated in Plymouth Carver school system, right? Here we are, married to the Mayflower. We weren't taught, our Indigenous history the correct way at Plymouth School. But I knew about it, of course, being raised by an elder of my tribe. But it. I think about back when I was young, and as Jeannine said, and even Verna, who was born in 1905, and she was a woman of color, and she experienced a lot of racism over her time, and just the imagery itself, it just you see these images and you look I can't count the times when I would see those images and it would almost make me feel embarrassed because I was born with a pretty big nose, right? So I always would look at those visions and wonder, is that what I look like? Does that how people see me? Because they always make these images. They don't depict what Native people look like, right? Not every Native person looks like a mascot. And the ones that you see, the Redskins. And growing up, I think it was harmful. And we know studies have proven that it's harmful for young people. Their self-esteem is lowered. They're less likely to join in athletic events because, especially if their school has an Indigenous mascot. And I look also to, um, as a person whose birth certificate says color or race, red, finding that out when I did my genealogy in high school, that's what my birth certificate said. It's like, wow. And then you have the Redskins and all of these things. So that's what I'll share. It's entirely accurate, and I can relate to it myself as a child and seeing those images and knowing how it made me feel personally. So thank you.
Various.
Yes, thank you. Um, the indigenous youth are no different than any other culture's youth. Um, in any culture, doesn't matter where they're from. Children are children, sensitive, aware. Um, and if anyone's culture was being mocked in the school system at any level, uh, I think that it doesn't matter what what your ancestry is, that child would feel some uneasiness. And the fact that they're indigenous is just magnified because of um, the kind of emphasis that are put in this country that's put on Indigenous people, classifying us as warriors, like Melissa said, the red men, the renegades. I mean, you might as well call us all savages because we were not all warriors. We weren't all renegades, and that's classifying us in this negative sense. And that gives this negativeness to the child. And, and especially in schools where this stuff is not supposed to be allowed, except if you're Indigenous. I went to high school and we had an Indigenous mascot. And during pep rallies, I really would go onto the bleachers because that's the only where I could go to hide. And I look back on my younger self, like I couldn't believe that, that my parents, I was angry at my parents for putting me in a school, that I had to deal with that. And then, when my children were younger playing sports, I had to pull them off of teams that had Indigenous names. Talking to the coaches or to the league, Little League or such, or Pop Warner, because my children didn't want to play for that team because of that cartoonish Cleveland Indian or the Redskin. I mean, these are our children. And even if they're not our children, we need to treat all children like they're our children. And this is a hostile thing that children have to deal with in the school system. And especially if you're Indigenous, these children are made fun of, bullied, if they stand up and say something against that mascot. And that's really an unsafe place for that child. And so the school is actually placing Indigenous children in an unsafe environment. And that's unacceptable. Everyone should be appalled that it's being allowed. But, as Indigenous, we kind of know the deal with this country and we know how we're treated and we know that it's okay that they do this because we're Indigenous, because that's the history of this country. And the fact that schools are still doing this makes us very aware that it's not just the history of this country. It's not in the past. It's right here and now that this is still continuing. And so, how are our youth affected? They're affected tremendously. All of our children are affected tremendously because the non-Indigenous are learning this racism in school. They're learning, let's make fun of these cultures. It's really unacceptable that this is happening. And the fact that we have to continue to do, talks like this is really worrisome because things haven't changed. 2024, things still haven't changed. But we are happy that we have an opportunity to speak. But our children are affected every single day in these school systems that have Indigenous mascots.
It was interesting that I was talking with my uncle this weekend, and one of the things he was explaining to me, and it was just giving me a whole kind of different way of looking at things, is that the genocide that has been happening to our Native people is continuing today in very different ways and somewhat levels, but largely because with this kind of hostility that our children are learning, right? They're silencing our children. They're not learning about or being proud of who they are. And as you continue to not talk about who you are and where you come from, you disappear. Right. And so, and there are people who actually believe that there are no more Indigenous people here in the United States, and children are being told that, right? I remember watching that on the film, and I knew that had actually happened over in Gayhead as well, where a child was teacher told them, these people don't exist anymore, and the child stood up and said, I'm right here. I do exist. So really, the fact that it's so hostile and it's hard for us to be able to stand up and be recognized and not have some sort of retaliation as a result is, as you said, Ferry, is unacceptable. Absolutely. Yes. All right. So tell us about some of the efforts that are going on here in Massachusetts to combat the use of mascots.
I guess I'll start if you'd like this time, or Farius can probably kick this one off if you'd like and talk a little bit about that. You've been on the panel a little bit longer than I have. You want to kick it off first and I'll follow up after you? Or do you want me to just...
Thank you. No, I can do it. It's up to you. If you want to go, you can go. So the efforts here have been, a long time, a lot of work. And I would just like to say it's not just the Indigenous people that are doing this work. We have a lot of indigenous people that are doing a lot of the work. And that's what's making this movement so special, because it's like a partnership um, between anyone who has some empathy, or who has a heart, or who has some kind of understanding for our situation that we're in. Um, and so, I mean, geez, where can I start? It's like we're everywhere. Um, we're trying to get, laws passed, and we're meeting with our representatives over and over again. We have our steering committee, um, and it's really tiring. It's a lot of work because, it's a lot of talking. It's a lot of going out and doing talks like this, just going to the State House, lobbying, um, talking to representatives who don't always care about what you're talking about. Um, and so it's really a collaborative, and it's really a lot of us that are doing a lot of this work. Um, and it's really important that we do talks like this, because we always telling people, if you're a Mass resident, talk to your representative, ask them, put some pressure on your representative, to let's get this ban on Indigenous mascots passed. Keep the pressure on our representatives, because that's really the only way some of these representatives are going to vote favorably for our bill, is for their constituents to put pressure on them. And so, your family, anyone that can vote, tell them to go put some pressure on their constituent. Let them know that, there's a real likelihood that you might not vote for them again um, if they're not gonna vote favorably for this bill. And because that's the power that we all have. All of us have that power, where we vote in our elected officials. And so if our elected officials aren't doing something, or are doing something, not doing something to stop racism, that's big, that's huge, because that's how we have to look at it. And so that's a lot of our efforts are doing just this right here, going into schools, university, middle schools, high schools, businesses, rallies. I mean, all of us, always trying to do our best to do our part uh, to get this ban on Indigenous mascots.
And for those who may not be aware, I think it's the Joanne Comerford bill that is actually out there that would ban native mascots in Massachusetts public schools, as well as any other ways of denigrating natives.
And Representative Brandy Fluker as well. She's actually submitted the bill as an amendment to the House budget. Let's see, but the amendment, the vast majority was not accepted. So we submitted a new version. I'm just updating you on this because I got this directly from one of our non-native allies, Laura Davis Delano. She's been a real big part of the work that we've been doing on the mascot committee. So the bill's currently with Ways and Means. But when I think about what Faries said, I think back from the beginning when, I got elected to chair back in 2015, when I first started this really boots on the ground grassroots work for my community. And I really feel that this effort, I mean, we know that National Congress of American Indians has been fighting this fight and trying to eradicate mascots since 1968. And it is, I see this, I'll answer that question after. So, organizations like National Congress of American Indians have been doing this for, 50, 100 years, trying to, get this work done and get these mascots eradicated. Organizations like Illuminative, they've made great strides to get the word out. And I think it really starts with, as Farias said, it's really being in settings and having people like yourselves interested and have a heart enough to really want to hear why mascots are not good for Native people. And the work really is in all the work we do. I think the effort is being present and doing I may not be working on mascot issues tomorrow, but it's certainly in the back of my mind, and it's certainly something that we talk about in each setting and every chance you get. So the work being done is really, like Faries said, you've got to get out, we've got to get out, we've got to educate people, talk to people. And there's no better way to get people to buy in and to want to help than educating them and teaching them why it's not right. So there's a lot of work being done. The legislative bills, there's several bills, some of them are in limbo, but the mascot bill is Senate Ways and Means. I just don't know if the number changed. I do see Laura in the audience. She may be able to put in the chat the exact number of the bill, just in case my document is older, because I know it was revised. If Laurel, there we go. Oh, nope, they haven't. So that's good. It's
Yes.
S245 and H.477 of the bills to support, and it's Comerford and Fluker Oakley. So that's just one of some other legislative on the legislative agenda that you could help and take a look at.
Okay, great. And look, I hope we didn't lose Jeannine. I don't see her on spotlighted anymore. So if we did, hopefully she'll be back. But as it's always interesting to think about, well, okay, so now that I'm aware, what can I do? And of course, Faries talked about the power we have in our votes. And in addition to that, as Melissa was saying, sometimes it's just continuing to bring it up so that more people are aware of the fact that this is a problem. Because I think, we've come to accept many things in our society. It's always just the way it's been, and not really think. Here comes Jeannine back again. The impact on people's lives, and this is what we're talking about: is people. We're talking about the impact on children, the impact on parents, the impact on families, the impact on entire communities. And sometimes it really just takes, first of all, making sure that you actually talk about it, that you actually raise the issue and help people to understand. Because as we know, there are people who do things completely out of ignorance, and we have no idea that this is something that's inappropriate. And until we take the time to educate, it doesn't get any better, right? We can't always assume people are doing it with complete malicious intent as much as they don't know any better. So let's help them to know, right? Jeannine, welcome back.
Yeah, sorry. We had 3 technical difficulties today now, right? To add to yours.
Oh my goodness. Awesome.
Yeah, just so
I don't
you
know if
know,
you had any comments about that question
Laurel did
around the
put it
efforts.
she did put it in the chat just so everyone has it. If you need any of she put the Action Network and the bills for the person that asked about that. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. So we've talked about the bills that are actually actively being pursued right now. We've talked about having more conversations and being aware of the harm that has happened, that can and does impact Native people of all ages. Are there any other efforts that are being made, or any other things that we should be aware of that are happening here in Massachusetts or elsewhere around really raising this issue of eliminating mascotting of natives?
I mean, I think all of the tribal indigenous people, and I think a lot of the different tribal serving organizations, I think in one way or another are really working on this. And, there are those folks that don't always want the mascots changed. So there are some challenges that we face even in that arena. But I think there's just a lot of support from indigenous people, and as Faries said, non-native people as well. So
Allies are critical to the process, aren't they? Right? Yes. All right. What can institutions and individuals do to support the cause?
Faries, you want to go first, or Jeannine?
Go ahead, Faries. You can go.
Thank you. Institutions, not a big fan because they can do stuff so fast and so instantly. Institutions can make change. They can do it. You have universities, all these places are schools. They can change things. Some schools do. I don't want to act like some schools don't. Some schools do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. There are other schools like Dartmouth that don't do the right thing because we pretty much know that they don't care how we feel about it. There's other schools like Foxborough who have voted to retire their Indigenous mascot, and their community are talking about getting rid of the school committee members that voted to put a ban on the mascot. It's so ugly. All of this is so extremely ugly. And it's so apparently clear that it's racism, and it's ugly because racism is ugly. So, I mean, people fight these battles all the time. I have so many friends, parents that are fighting this battle every day in their child's school because their child is standing up and doing what's right, and bringing awareness about this racism in the school. And the kids are death threats, parents threatening to punch the kid in the face. Them wanting to get the family out of the community. You don't belong here. You're not from this community. You just moved here. And it's so ugly. And so, our institutions can do something about it. They can really do something about it. These universities, I mean, all the money and wealth in the Commonwealth, they can put pressure on everyone. Look, we're going to change this. Remember, the only reason the Redskins changed their name is because their money dried up.
Yep.
All their sponsors said, no more money for you. And because the Redskins, we've been asking them to retire that mascot for decades. Nothing happened. It wasn't until they saw that their money was evaporating, they changed it so fast. They changed it. And we need to do the same thing across the board. And these institutions have the power and the resources for this change. It's just, are they willing to do something about it? A lot of our universities here, they have this, act like they are the ethical compass, but they're not doing anything. No one's really doing anything. It's regular people like us and the people on board with us, and regular people that are putting pressure on this good old fashioned roots work, right? That's making this change. It's the people that are doing it. It's the people that are talking to our representatives, that have convinced our representative, that have told our story, and our representatives, our supportive representatives, have really done a lot of work to make this happen. But it's the institutions that are lacking here. And so I'm not a fan of the institutions, because I go to a lot of these institutions and ask them to help, but they don't. They're too political. They don't want to get on its side. But institutions can do this change. They can put a lot of pressure on everything to make this change. So, I mean, people are doing the work. Institutions can do a lot more.
And in fact, institutions are merely large groups of people, right? So it still goes back to the individual on many levels, because if you don't have the right number of people and a critical enough mass who can actually see what you're talking about, it makes things very difficult going forward. What are some other things that people can be doing, or institutions for that matter, if there were to be a solution that an institution could implement?
Well, I mean, I think they have to listen, right? I think we've already come to that conclusion. And I know, as Faries said, the institutions have been part of the problem, and the school committees that aren't willing to listen, and the people, and that's a lot of times the citizens don't want to hear it. They're attached to these mascots, and they say they honor Native people. And I know Desi's trying to get involved, and we're having Desi involved in this work and writing this mascot bill, and putting implications on it if and penalties if the schools don't comply. So sometimes, as these Faries says, you have to force the hand in certain cases, but they have the ability to do it. We really got to talk to the legislators. You've got to like we're doing today, explain it, explain why, and why is it important. So taking those steps it's critical, and it's a lot of work, though. I mean, how long have we been on this committee, Faries? 4 years, 3 or 4 years, and we've gotten the bill almost there, and then it was kicked back, and we got it. I mean, we've just been constantly fighting that battle, trying to get it through. So it's a tough, complex road, and I don't think we still don't have all the answers, right? So.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of what Farius and Melissa said, same, I feel like individually, we just need to keep getting the word out there, getting the message, hoping that the right person listens. Farius mentioned earlier that it takes a certain type of person to actually care to make the change in the position that they're in. They're able to make the change, but they actually have to have a heart. Seeing this film, I don't know how many of these people have actually watched this film. I don't know how you could watch this film and not say, we're okaying racism. We're allowing these schools, these children, the youth to experience both sides of it. The way they're coming out, if they're looking at the image of a Native American in a negative way, or if they are Native American and they feel the way that they feel, right, in these schools, or the parents that are trying to fight for their child and they're getting threatened. It's just negative all around. I really don't understand why the conversation is going on for so long. It should just be changed. So that's where I'm at. Just being as an individual, keep fighting, doing the work that Farius and Melissa have been leading. In you all, obviously, we are on this panel this evening, is what I would say. Could maybe keep stepping towards some type of change.
Well, those are all of the questions that I have, and I know we've been addressing questions as they've been coming into the chat. So I'd just like to open up the Q&A to our audience here. Does anybody have any questions for the panel?
Beth,
Yes.
I'd like to just, joining us today is also Roberta Grogan, who leads a parent center in Long Island and has been really facilitating and coordinating a lot of the work with parent centers in the Northeast on Indigenous issues, and has been putting a lot of information in the chat on a lot of the wonderful work they've been doing in New York.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Pam, and thank you, Roberta, for all of the work that you're doing. And I have been seeing you've been responding with a lot of information about New York, so that was pretty exciting to see.
Elizabeth, it's meant to be, first of all, no thanks necessary, because the thanks is to all of you, and the apology, because the indignation that you experience of people holding on to these images is just amazing to me while kids are being hurt. Every day right now, they have a couple of, the reason that I put those posts in, it's not all of the ones, is because it's a 20-year battle from when they identified the fact that this should go away, and when they're actually enacting and penalizing schools, public school districts, by taking funding away if they don't remedy this situation. And really, that's what it all comes down to in the end, right? So the only way to make the change is to threaten that funding. So here in New York, there's an added level of sad irony, because we're not working to change the curriculum within our school, within our social studies and our history curriculum, to include a true history that goes on. And as I do outreach, that went on, because that would really make a lot of people very uncomfortable, right? So as I do outreach, and as I start to form some really nice relationships with especially members of the Shinnecock Nation out here, which I grew up, maybe that's where my heart is. I grew up knowing that members of the tribal nation, and respecting them and learning a great deal from them. So I think that's where my heart is in this. But I live up island, in an area surrounded by 2 school districts that are digging in and actually suing New York State with taxpayer money. Let's think about that, with taxpayer money, to hold on to these images. And I had a conversation with one of the a former school board member, quite by accident. I didn't know she was on the school board. Something came up at a sled hockey game, an Indigenous sport, by the way, got its start in Indigenous areas. And she said, "Oh yeah, we're from Massapequa." I said, "Oh, that's funny. I do Native American outreach work, and we're really working hard to seal up that deal on getting rid of the Native mascots, and they're the Massapequa chiefs, and they really dig in on that, and it's a big, tribal headpiece." So that being said, I said, how does your board justify maintaining it and fighting it? And she said, "Well, we spoke to an Indian in the area." And I'm like, "I'm sorry, you spoke to one Native American in the area. What tribe? What tribal affiliation did that person have? What ability did that have? And how do you know that that was it? That person was related to a tribe? Like, that's when you spoke to one person. Think of when you guys say all of the the experiences of you as kids and of your kids going on to those teams or not going on to those teams after you watch this movie and after hearing you all speak. It's just so much more important to dig in. And I hope you find in this group that's done some fabulous work up in Massachusetts, allies. It's been my pleasure and my honor and my sadness to have to um, engage in this because it's just wrong. That's it. Thank you all for your perspective. It helps.
The person you were just talking about reminds me of the report that was in the documentary where they were saying that 90% of natives had no problem with mascots. And the woman was talking about the fact that as they were trying to do their own data collection, because of course that did not come from native study, it came from white study. But as the natives tried to get some information, they were never able to replicate that data, right? So we don't know who that 90% is.
Well, yeah, and the interesting part of that, Elizabeth, is that, there's some work that just came out of the US Census Bureau indicating the undercount, the incredible undercount of Native Americans here in the country. So 90% of an undercount is what?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Shay had a question in the chat earlier, which was, are you working with other states who have been successful in these endeavors, and are you getting support from them as you're pushing this effort forward here locally? Can you tell me whether or not that is the case? I imagine there has to be some networking or learnings that are coming from other states.
Well, I know we've used some examples from a lot of different other states in this work. And I know there's, like I said, a lot of tribal serving organizations like NCAI and Illuminative that are outside of Massachusetts. But I think there's so much to do internally. And I have heard about the work they're doing in New York. I think that did come up in one of my conversations somewhere. And I think there's so much to do. If you look at the list of schools and you see how many mascots there actually are in Massachusetts, I was really shocked when I first started this work. So we are, of course, connecting and learning from other states. I'm not sure directly how many, outside of NCAI and some others that we've received letters of support from, that we're actually sort of collaborating with. But Faries might know some answers to that, and Jeannine, I don't.
I'm sure. We have collaborated with other states. Not me myself, because we have people on the committee that do a lot of the work. I talk. I go out and I talk to people about this issue, but we have people on our committee that do a lot of the work, a lot of the grassroots work, and they're the ones reaching out to other communities. They're the ones reaching out to other states, to other schools. And Laurel is awesome. She is awesome. She has put so much of her time into this. She deserves to be honored. Absolutely. Because she has done a lot of the work. And it's beyond me how a person can do that, but can't have a job at the same time, so it's just beyond me, but we absolutely do. And we talk to other tribes that are not in the Commonwealth as well. So we're always collaborating. We're always trying to figure this issue out. but it really, it boils down to some communities don't want to change. No matter what you do, then they don't want to change. No matter what you say, they don't want to change. They want to keep their mascot, even if it was Mickey Mouse. They want to keep it. And so I don't think there's a blueprint for changing the mascot or putting a ban on the mascot. I think it's just, our lawmakers having to do it, because we can't go into every community and continue to try to convince that community that they should, retire their mascot. We really need to have our lawmakers passing this law, passing it into law that puts a ban on it, and not only takes away the funding for the school, but if a school refuses to retire that mascot, that school can't compete. They can't compete. They're barred from competing. So they have a mascot that they can't even use, sports teams that can't compete. And so, there's ways, because some of these communities, no matter what, even if the state tells them to, they're not going to want to change it. But it's all education, and that's why we're here today. We have to just keep educating, and especially the youth. So the youth are tomorrow's leaders. And if they're educated now, then they don't grow up in this void where they have no knowledge of this issue. And so we just continue to educate.
Linda, you have been waiting very, very patiently. What is your question? You're still muted, Linda.
I had been talking to a state representative recently who said that mascot bill is actually being held up by one of the Wampanoag tribes that is concerned about the wording. So I guess the questions become, are you communicating with each other? Do you know exactly what might be going on with that? I know it came really close at the end of the last session, and we did hear it was some objections from one of the tribes that actually didn't bring it to the floor.
Does anybody know anything about that?
No.
Or if in fact it's
You
even
have
true?
you have to remember something is very, very important, because this is a part of the racism that Indigenous people face every single day. And it goes back to, treating Indigenous people like we are a monolith, like we're all the same people. You're Indians, you're Indigenous people. That's like saying, even if you look back, I'll give an example. The national parks always refers to sites that they know, Indigenous sites. Oh, a Native American site, right? Not that it's, what tribe is it? Oh, it's Native American. Oh, yeah, all the Native Americans are the same. And so we've been treated like monoliths, like we all spoke the same. It's like going to Spain and asking them, you speak European, right? No, Europe is a big place that has many cultures inside of it. That's the same thing with the Americas, It's a big place that has many different cultures. All Indigenous people are not the same. We spoke different languages. We had different rituals, we had different ways of dressing. We had different ways of expressing ourselves. And so not all Indigenous people are going to agree. One of the things that one of these representatives required for this bill to pass, you guys have to agree 100% across the board. All of your people need to agree. That's insane. All of our people need to agree. All of your people don't agree on stuff, and you still get stuff passed. So it really boils down to, the majority of the Indigenous people here in the Commonwealth are telling everybody that this is really hurtful. This is racism. And it doesn't even matter what the Indigenous people say. This is racism. It doesn't matter what we say. We can agree, not agree. This is racist, and it's being allowed in our schools. Doesn't matter what culture they're talking about. This is racism. So for any representative to point the finger at any Indigenous people, I tell them they're a coward and they're hiding behind their racism. It's so simple for Indigenous people who've experienced racism for over 400 years from the colonists. It's so clear that this is racism because there's no other race that this happens to here. There's no other race that's being used as a mask. Could you imagine if they had a black African mascot? People would be losing their jobs. There'd be lawsuits. What if it was a Jewish mascot? What do you think would happen? It's only indigenous people. And now fingers are being pointed that we all have to agree. It's racism. It doesn't matter what the indigenous people are saying. It's racism. And it needs to be treated as such by our lawmakers, because those are the ones who can put a stop to this. But it is racism. And so, do all indigenous people agree? No, we're not a monolith. We're not clones. We don't all agree on everything. We don't all agree on how we should dress. I know my tribe, we don't all agree on stuff. Sometimes our council meetings go 4 or 5 hours because we can't agree on something that's simple.
Yeah.
So, treating us like we're a monolith is really disrespect. And that's one of the ugly sides of racism, is treating all indigenous people like they're the same. And we all have to agree on every last thing, like we're not human beings too.
That was
Could I
interesting.
could I follow up on that? I don't feel like my question was answered. And I think what has been said to me is that my representative has given me a piece of misinformation, that maybe they're holding the whole thing up and it's nothing to do with the fact that there's a tribe that wants some different wording. Have I been misinformed?
No, what has happened is you have a representative that's hiding behind the fact that it's racism. Why? This is what I want to know. How is something held up? How is racism allowed to continue because of wording? How is that possible? Because of wording? Oh, so let's continue to be racism. Let's continue to be racist and use these mascots because we can't find the right words. That's insanity. For us, that's insanity. Everything is so simple. We don't have to complicate it. And so I'm not saying you've been misinformed, but what's happening is you have certain representatives that are hiding the fact that we're not all monoliths, when they should be looking at the fact that indigenous mascots are racist. Race is a form of racism, and we need to eradicate that part of racism from our school system. That's really important. Not that everybody agrees. Really important that we can. Racism is a monster. It's a beast. Will we ever eradicate racism? Probably not. But we have to get rid of it wherever we can, little pieces at a time. And this is one of those pieces that we need to get rid of. And for anyone to say that it's being held up because of anything at all, I say that we need to get some new representatives in there. I'm not a fan. I'm sorry, I'm not a fan of lawmakers. Just not a fan. There's a lot of back and forth that goes on, and we need action. We need this to stop, because every day our children are going into these schools. We need this to stop yesterday.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and I kind of equate it to some of what I've learned in African American culture, right? We had a number of different civil rights leaders who all had very different approaches, right? Some were nonviolent, some were about education, some took by any means necessary. And so within that culture, there was no monolith of approaches, there's no monolith of people, but there was an agreement that this needed to stop, right? So similarly, this is what is experiencing in the Native culture. For someone to say, well, the reason we're not doing this is because there's one particular person or group of people who are opposed to the wording, doesn't stop people from actually taking action and doing something differently. It's being used as an excuse.
Elizabeth,
Shay?
what I heard, I'm sorry, no, Shay, do you mind if I speak?
Oh, no, please do.
Thank you, my love.
Yeah.
What I heard was that they're not going to make a move and they're going to blame it on Native Americans once
Exactly.
again. So,
Yep.
yeah, so that's what I hear. And you know what? The constituency that any elected official reports to, I'm quite sure, Paris, your point is not missed on me. that racism is racism. And as was stated in the film, it's like being a little pregnant. You can't be a little racist. You're racist or you're not. And continuing this is from a governmental standpoint, continuing a racist practice. So to blame it on a, one tribe withholding ascension is that is absolutely crazy. And you're right, vote them out.
Continuing the othering, right? We saw how quickly government and institutions could move when they wanted to during the pandemic. Things can get passed very easily when people have enough of an incentive and caring enough to do it. So to actually point the finger at the marginalized community and say, this is your fault that we haven't passed this bill is ridiculous.
Well, it's a lot, what it does is it just creates a space where they can say, look, they can't even agree on it,
Yeah.
and it's used as a reason to hold it up. Like as Faries said, does that happen anywhere else? I forget what, I was in another situation where this was being discussed. And I said, this wouldn't happen if it wasn't an Indigenous community. We're sectioned out, and not just the mascot issue. There are other issues that happen in the Commonwealth that I won't talk about here today, but there is a lot of laws and actions that have happened that are completely unfair to tribes in the Commonwealth. And, we're looking at one of them. This is just one piece of a much larger puzzle that really needs to be put together and fixed. And then the other excuse is, oh, well, there's not that many of them. There's only, 1%. There's not that many Native people in Massachusetts. So how does that matter? And when you go to another thing you think about, I go to fill out paperwork, there's not even an option half the time to choose Native American. You can't even pick your own race on the forms that we fill out. It's not there. So how can you get data, and how can you do all of these things that you do for all of the other folks when Native people don't have that ability? So we're marginalized in way more areas than we even see in the everyday setting. So yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add that.
So we are at the top of the hour at 6 o'clock, and unfortunately that means we have run out of time, which is sad because this is such an amazing conversation and discussion. But I want to thank all of you, Melissa, Faries, and Jeannine, for joining us today, and Roberta. Thank you for joining us from New York, and helping us to at least have a better understanding of this topic around how mascots and mascotting of natives is harmful, the impact that it's having on our communities, and also on the activity that's going on to change it and how we can all be involved. We do have the power to change this. We have the power as individuals to raise this topic and to talk about it with others and help others to understand it. And we also have the power as individuals to talk with our legislators and really help them to understand that this is an important issue, and whether or not they vote on this in favor of this bill will likely have an impact on whether or not they are going to be able to come back as people in power that we've elected as our elected officials. So thank you to our audience as well for being here with us and taking the time to listen and being interested and being curious and learning. And I hope that that you'll take this and use this in ways that will actually be favorable on behalf of Natives across the country. And in the meantime, there are a number of things that are coming up on the Federation calendar because, as you know, the Federation is always got something going on to serve families. And so in June and July, the next installments of the Parent Training Consultant Institute will be taking place. And also coming up in just a couple of weeks is the Transition Conference, Planning a Life, which is May 17th and 18th, the 17th being virtual and the 18th being in person. And again, that information you can find all on the website. Thank you, Emma, for putting that in the chat. So I wish you all a good evening, be safe, and please remember that justice is everybody's responsibility. We all have a part in this, and I look forward to continuing to partner with all of you on getting this right. Have a fantastic evening, folks.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thank you.
Emma.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night. Good night,
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you. Be safe.
Look forward to
Thank
seeing
you
you all at
all.
Thank
Apollo
you.
or
Be
two
well.
sometime in the
Thank
future.
Great
you.
job. Thank you. You are not alone.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you so much,
much.
folks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.